Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Plugging into the World of Electric Vehicles. I'm Slavina Damyanova and I'm the head of editorial at ISI Emerging Markets Group. And thank you all for joining. Today we have such a great turnout. Today, the automotive sector has experienced unprecedented challenges in the last few years, and there have been large-scale disruptions in supply chains. Materials, the volume and structure of demand, there has been a shift in customer sentiment towards being more environmentally conscious. As you know, we have an editorial team at ISI. We're focusing on industry and macro research. And for those of you who may not be so familiar with our company, let me do some quick introduction. As it relates to industry research, we're covering a number of different verticals, automotive being one of them. And today with us we have Gabriela Gandowska, who has more than 16 years of experience in media and research, and she is our automotive industry expert. Together with Gabriela, we'll publish a number of in-depth industry reports on the automotive industry. And today she will share the more recent trends and challenges for the larger sector. Though electric vehicles make up still a very small slice of the market, about 9% of new sales in 2021, their share more than doubled in the last 1 year, which is a strong sign that the era of electric cars may come sooner than we expected. So we have invited our partners at the Insight Partners to share their research results on the outlook of electric vehicles, and in particular the infrastructure that is integral to the sustainable growth. The Insight Partners is a premium market research company, and they help clients in getting solutions to their research requirements through syndicated research and consulting research services on different industry specializations. We have Naveen Chittargi today with us. Naveen manages the technology practice of the Insight Partners. He has more than 8 years of experience in market research and consulting practices across various domains. He has authored more than 100 research reports and more than 30 consulting projects. He's also an active member of the IEEE, which is the world's largest technical professional organization for the advancement of technology. Saikat Muzamdar manages the automotive and transportation domain of the Insight Partners. He has more than 7 years of experience in market research across the automotive domains. He has worked with clients across the world on research projects of their request and has authored, again, more than 100 research reports. Before we start, I would like to mention a couple of points that will help us interact during the session. We have received many of your questions already at the pre-registration stage, and our speakers are incorporating some of their answers to the presentations as they speak. During the event, you will be able to ask questions. You can submit them in writing using the question panel on your right. We'll answer as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end. We also have a handout section just above the question panel where we have uploaded our presentation. You can download it for your reference. And at the end, we have a short survey which will help us understand how you found the event, and if you have any suggestions about further topics that you may want to hear us talk and analyze, just feel free to fill them out. So let's see the agenda for today. Gabriela will share the overview of the automotive sector industry globally and the key outlook for the sector. After that, Naveen and Saikat will share more about the market for electric vehicles, particularly the charging infrastructure, and the competitive landscape and sales analysis at the global level. And I think they have also some discussion on major economies. So I'll hand over to Gabriela. Gabriela, what can you tell us about where the automotive sector is now and what the prospects are?
Thank you, Silvina. Before we plug into the world of electric vehicles, let's take a close look at the state of the automotive sector now, 2 years after the outbreak of COVID-19. As Silvina mentioned, the pandemic brought unseen challenges for the automakers, plunging the sector into its worst crisis ever, with auto production falling by the record 16% in 2020. Production volumes returned to growth last year, but the recovery was much weaker than initial expectations, as the magnitude of the logistical difficulties amid the supply chain disruptions surprised both analysts and market players. Looking at the chart, we see that COVID-19 pushed auto production down to levels last seen in 2010, meaning that the pandemic wiped off all the growth made over the past decade. After the initial shock, the automotive sector suffered in the first half of 2020, when car makers were forced to shut down plants. Production started to ramp up in the second half of the year as restrictions around the globe eased. Governments implemented wide-scale financial packages to aid the economic recovery and improve consumer and business confidence. As a result, the automotive sector returned to growth in 2021, when production increased by 3.1% to slightly over 18 million motor vehicles. Sales figures also recovered strongly. After falling at their steepest rate to just 78 million vehicles in 2020, and we should know that these are levels last seen in 2011, sales rebounded strongly by 30% in the first half of 2021. To see which countries acted as catalysts for this growth, let's take a look at the next slide, please. Thank you. So for a better understanding of the development in the sector, we will analyze trends in the key markets: China, the European Union, the United States, Japan, and India. Together, they account for nearly 80% of global production of motor vehicles. As the upper right-hand chart demonstrates, China emerged as the main engine of growth. The country, which is responsible for over a third of global auto production, assembled 26 million motor vehicles, which was by nearly 4% more than in 2020. But what is more important is that production volumes were not only higher than in 2020, but also higher than the pre-pandemic levels. China was the only one of the 5 main players to achieve such results, and we should say that the reason for this being the effective and the rapid the ways that the Chinese authorities managed to bring the virus under control, while the rest of the world struggled to do so in most of 2020. The US and Japan also produced more vehicles than in 2020, but the production levels were lower than in 2019. The case of the EU and Japan is not so bright. Production there continues to decline. EU auto production declined by 5% compared to the already low levels of 2020. In Japan, production fell for the 3rd straight year to its lowest level in 45 years. As we go into 2022, let's talk more about what's in store for the automotive sector. And we're moving to the next slide, please. Well, we have identified 4 main factors that we believe will shape the automotive sector outlook. The major favorable factor will be the continued support of governments for the adoption of electric vehicles. Slowing global growth and rising inflation, on the other hand, will weigh on confidence and then car sales. The supply chain problems, and more specifically the shortage of semiconductors, will continue to hold back production this year and most likely next year. And lastly, the newest challenge, Russia's war in Ukraine, that is having both direct and indirect impact on the sector. We will analyze each of these factors. The major booster for the automotive sector last year was the economic rebound and the solid consumer demand. The generous stimulus packages introduced by governments around the world, the accommodative policy of central banks, and the rollout of vaccine programs bolstered economic activity, with global GDP returning to positive territory. The IMF has estimated that the global economy expanded by nearly 6% last year. Looking at the main player, we see that all of them have posted positive GDP figures, and most importantly, the growth was exceeded the pre-pandemic expansion. Over the past few months, however, the economic conditions around the world have worsened amid the emergence of new COVID-19 variants, supply chain disruptions, and energy price volatility. As a result, expectations for global growth have worsened. Both the IMF and the World Bank now expect the global economy to grow below 6% this year, and between 3 and 4% next year. And we should note also that these are forecasts made before the start of the war. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, market analysts are starting to lower their projections. But we do expect another supportive factor that aided the recovery of the sector to continue to play a supportive role this year. Can we have the next slide, please? And this is the increased momentum towards the adoption of electric vehicles, as a rising number of governments are racing to set new ambitious targets for the electrification of their fleet as part of their pledges to become carbon neutral. Also, there has been increasing number of countries planning to phase out petrol and diesel vehicles. That is pushing a major transformation in the automotive sector. Though electric vehicles still make up for a small part of new car sales, they accounted for 9% last year. Their share more than doubled in just a year. Last year, the EU presented its target to shift to full electric vehicles from 2035. The bloc is aiming for an effective ban on the sale of new fossil fuel powered vehicles from 2035 as part of its Green Deal that aims to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by mid-century. And the EU is not alone. The UK presented its net zero strategy that sets out similar targets, introducing a ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars from 2030. And from that year, the US is aiming for half of the new cars to be clean vehicles. The Chinese government has set a target for new energy vehicles to account for 20% of new car sales by 2025. That clear path toward decarbonization suggests that the bulk of the investments in the automotive sector will be directed towards the development of zero-emission vehicles, and we do expect that a major part of the funds will be invested in the building of an extensive charging network that has so far been one of the main challenges and major impediment to the adoption of electric vehicles, deterring potential buyers. Now let's go to the next slide, and the next factor that we believe will shape the outlook, and it is the continued supply chain pressures that were induced by COVID-19 and more specifically, the shortage of semiconductors that has been holding back production last year and will continue to do so this year, as demand for automotive electronics is rising, with cars becoming more software defined. As the chart demonstrates, demand for semiconductors from the automotive industry is expected to increase at a compound annual growth rate of 10% over the next 5 years, and to be the main driver of demand for semiconductors. With demand for semiconductors rising at a much faster rate than the increase in the production manufacturing capacity, and car makers having to compete for chips with other rapidly expanding industries such as consumer electronics, the consensus is that the supply crunch will last into next year at least, forcing automakers to draft strategies to make their supply chains more secure and resilient to future shocks. A first step would be for car makers and semiconductor suppliers to change the nature of their contracts to include better capacity planning. A second step would be reducing the dependency on a single vendor. Semiconductor production hubs are concentrated in Asia, with Taiwan, South Korea, and China accounting for over 80% of the global foundry market. And then that brings us to the third step, nearshoring, onshoring production of semiconductors. In its latest 5-year plan, China has identified chip independence as a top national priority. US president has vowed to build a secure American supply chain by reviving domestic production, and the European Union is devising measures to make its own chips. The reshoring of semiconductor chip production from Asia to Europe and the United States could potentially change the industry and make the automotive supply chain more resilient to future disruption risks. And now we go to the next slide and talk about the newest challenge facing the automotive sector. The automotive sector has limited exposure to Russia and Ukraine, given their small share in the global automotive production and sales. As the chart shows, Russia accounted for just 2% of the global auto production last year. On a regional scale, it accounted for 10% of European automotive production. Therefore, the war poses increasing risk to European production and sales, with Russia being the fourth biggest market in Europe. Ukraine is a source of the second direct effect, we believe, will be the disruption to the supply chain. Ukraine is a key supplier of wire harnesses that power electric systems. The country has 17 wiring harness production facilities that supply mainly European car makers, with half of it going to car production plants in Germany and Poland. And we have already witnessed a number of German automakers announcing that they will slow production at some plants due to the disruption in the supply chain. The third direct effect being the disruption into the supply of Russian palladium. Russia is the second biggest producer of palladium after South Africa, responsible for 30% of the world's mined palladium. Ukraine, on the other hand, is a key supplier of neon gas that is used in the production of chips. So for now, immediate risks are low, given that semiconductor producers have sufficient inventory. But if the conflict drags on, we do expect that the companies will be forced to find alternative suppliers, and that will take months, if not longer. With all that in mind, we believe that the main risks tied to the war are indirect ones, centered around commodity prices. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is fueling the already high commodity prices. Prices of aluminum, nickel, precious metals surged since the start of the conflict, which is weighing on automakers' operating margins. For example, metal prices increased by 8% in March from the previous month, while the annual increase was 28%. Fluctuations in commodity prices can substantially affect earnings, given that material costs make up 2/3 of automakers' total cost of sales. Energy prices that affect both businesses and consumers increased by 24% on a monthly basis in March. Agricultural prices also increased strongly, rising by 28% on an annual basis in March. Rising energy and agricultural prices are pushing up inflation even higher, thus reducing households' real incomes and dampening consumer confidence. So, with all that in mind, we believe that the sector is heading for a challenging year, but a year nonetheless that will offer plenty of opportunities for growth, mainly in the EV sector. And back to you, Slovina.
Thank you, Gabi. Yes, another challenging year after a few already, but as always, we're trying to find the good story here. So let's hand over to our partners to focus on the opportunities in the electric vehicles sector, and particularly the charging infrastructure and enabling that. So Naveen, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Slovina. And firstly, I'd like to thank Gabriel as well to giving us an understanding around how the automotive sector have been in the last couple of years. There has been a lot of factors which has been impacting this particular industry, may it be the pandemic, may it be the semiconductor chip shortage, or in terms of the recent event that is Russia-Ukraine war. So having said this, we have seen a lot of changes that has happened, wherein all the developments which were expected that has been delayed. But then as we have seen the rising concern of the transportation sector impacting the environment has led to an unprecedented global requirement for decarbonizing the transportation sector itself to meet the climate goals and limit the global warming. So thereby influencing a large amount of adoption of low carbon technology in the transportation. So also the growing concern for the adverse impact of transportation that is related to the emission, and also there have been a shift in the consumer behavior towards the zero emission vehicles. This has resulted a significant increase in the light duty passenger vehicles across the globe, especially the strong economies such as West, China, and the European region. So to start with the EV charging infrastructure, so let us try to understand how this entire charging infrastructure market have been in the recent years. Now that we have known how the EV sector itself is growing, now let us also try to understand how the EV charging infrastructure have been. So electric vehicles, since they are gaining more popularity in terms of as the policymakers and the vehicle manufacturers are boosting their actions related to EV adoption, favorable policies and rapid increase in the charging networks is further aiding the adoption of EVs. So this definitely reduces the reliance on the oil-based fuels, and also it helps in significant reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which is the main intent again when it comes to EVs. Hence, EVs definitely are considered to be 2 to 4 times more efficient than the conventional ICE vehicles. So we have seen that EV stocks are inflating at a prime rate across the world when it comes to China, Europe, North America. So this can definitely be attributed to the cost of batteries, which is again dropping rapidly, and expansion of the charging infrastructure. So since we have taken this entire study, as per our analysis, the global EV charging infrastructure market was valued at 7.98 billion in 2020, and it is expected to reach about 23.4 billion by end of 2028. So some of the key countries contributing to this particular large adoption of EVs or EV charging infrastructure include the US, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, UK, and so on. So definitely China have been one of the major economy who have been adopting to charging infrastructure, and there has been a lot of developments that we have seen in the recent past. So can we move on to the next slide? So when we look at the EV charging market, it is witnessing a tremendous demand in the current scenario owing to the increase of sales of EVs across the globe. So the industry is experiencing substantial investment and also the main part, the governmental support, which has been propelling the growth of the market. Some of the other key points to see, global sales of EVs accounted to 2.6 million units that has been sold in the first half of 2021 compared to the sales of the previous year, almost accounting to approximately 26% of the new sales in the global automotive market, including the ICEs. So the dynamic industry growth of EV is marked again by the implementation of government initiatives and the policies of several countries across the globe. So moving on to the next slide. So let us try to understand how this entire EV charging infrastructure market can be looked at when it comes to different geographies. So looking at the geographical analysis, we had taken into consideration Asia Pacific, Europe, North America, and Middle East and South America. But however, three of the major regions that we see is one is starting with Asia Pacific, which according to our global analysis of EV charging infrastructure market, it holds one of the largest market share with 45.3% in 2020 among the other regions. Further, it is also anticipated to continue its dominance to acquire about 46.1% market share by 2028 in the global market. So again, various policies, government initiatives, that too with in some of the countries like China, Japan, South Korea, have been aiding to all this larger demand of EV charging infrastructure in the APAC region. So now when we look at the European region, the EV charging infrastructure market was valued at about 2.27 billion in 2020, and it is projected to reach about 7.78 billion by 2028. Again, it is also expected to grow at a CAGR of 17.2% between 2021 and 2028. According to one of the studies, making the transition to zero emission mobility, published by ACEA 2021 edition, EV charging infrastructure has been quite uneven across the Europe. There are approximately 224,000 electric vehicle charging stations in the region, wherein some of the key countries who contribute to this are the three major countries like the Netherlands, Germany, France, which almost account for about 70% of EV charging points in Europe, wherein the Netherlands holds about 66,000 charging stations, France 45,000, and Germany about 44,000 charging points. Strong initiatives and the policies have aided to the steep rise in publicly available slow as well as fast chargers, reaching approximately about 1.3 million units, which are being deployed in the year 2020. So now coming at North America, North America is the third largest region in terms of the market size of EV charging infrastructure. The region is expected to grow at a CAGR of 12.1% between 2021 and 2028, accounting to a revenue of 3.27 billion, which is expected by 2028. So moving on to the next slide. So during our course of research, we have also deep dived into some of the key market segments, wherein comparing the hardware, software, AC versus DC chargers, IEC modes, and there have been a lot of several market dynamics which we have witnessed while we analyze this particular market. So the market share of hardware versus software, when we analyze, the hardware had a highest share of 2021 in the year 2021 with a 67.3%. And some of the key hardware components manufacturers who have been contributing to this larger share are ABB Limited, Bosch Automotive Service Solutions, Delta Electronics, EVBox, Siemens AG, and Tesla. Further, as we analyze the hardware setup, AC chargers are witnessing highest adoption and is one of the prevalent charging techniques. AC charging systems comprising of level 1 and level 2 charging types holds a market share of 74.6% in 2021, wherein we have seen AC level 2 chargers have been mostly adopted charging techniques across the globe. On the basis of charger type, private chargers led the market share with about 64.8%, and it is expected to grow at a CAGR of 13.9% between 21 and 2028. Further, our analysis was also included in terms of the IEC modes, where the analysis depict that, okay, mode 3 AC slow charging accounted for the largest market share in 2021, accounting to approximately 55.4%. And notably, IEC mode 4, that is DC fast charger segment, is expected to grow at a prime CAGR accounting to about 16.9% between 2021 and 2028. So, having analyzed all these types of chargers, IEC mode, and also an overall market of say EV charging infrastructure, we have observed a lot of dynamics, the factors which are influencing the growth of the market. At the same time, there are a lot of factors which are hindering or restraining the growth and developments. So now let us have a look at what are these factors, how they have been impacting this particular market in the recent past, and also how these drivers would influence the growth of the market in the coming years. So now I would like my colleague Saikat help us explain more about these pointers. Saikat?
Thank you, Naveen. Welcome everyone to this webinar. So I would like to take you through the key market dynamics. So when we step over the market dynamics, these are the market drivers and the restraining factors. So there are various key market dynamic factors that aids as well as restricts the growth of an EV charging infrastructure. So firstly, I would like to start with the market drivers. So the first driver would be the surge in the production of and sales of electric vehicles. So as Naveen mentioned earlier, that the production of the sales of electric vehicles have been penetrating at a very prime rate across the globe. So this is again continuously helping the charging infrastructure market to boom. So the rising concern for the adverse impact of transportation related emissions and shift of consumer behavior towards zero emission vehicles have resulted in a significant increase in the adoption of light duty passenger vehicles across the electric light duty passenger vehicle across the globe. Basically in the economies such as US, China and the European Union. The global share of new passenger electric vehicles have risen at an average of nearly 50% per year since 2015. Notably, China has the largest fleet of electric vehicles globally, with 4.5 million electric cars, and Europe witnessed the largest annual increase to reach a total of 3.2 million electric passenger vehicles in the year 2020. The second important driver would be the support from government policies. The scaling of EV adoption globally has resulted in the rising importance of convenient and affordable public charges, which requires strong government support. Several governments worldwide have provided support for EV charging infrastructure by implementing measures such as direct investment to initially install public accessible chargers and initiatives and incentives for EV owners to install charging points at home. Various metro cities and prominent urban center planners have taken stringent measures to support the widespread adoption of EVs, including strategic deployment of charging infrastructure and implementation of preferential and prohibited circulation or access schemes like low and zero emission zones or differentiated circulation. The third important driving factor would be the growing concern toward environmental pollution. With the increasing environmental concerns across the globe, the automotive manufacturers are focusing on reducing the greenhouse gas emitted from vehicles. The conventional vehicles, such as ICE vehicles, use fossil fuels and they emit a large amount of greenhouse gases. The only viable substitute for fuel-based vehicles is electric vehicles, such as the battery electric vehicles or hybrid electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Now, there are various restraining factors that are hindering the overall market growth of the EV charging infrastructure. The first is the lack of uniformity in charging standards and connectors. The EV charging connector or plug standard varies across different geographies and EV models, and various fast charging technologies have separate plugs. For instance, automakers support the CCS or the combined charging system in North America and Europe, whereas the CHAdeMO standard is used in Japan. Similarly, in China, most of the EVs uses the GBT standard. In North America, every electric vehicle manufacturer except Tesla uses a SAE J1772 connector, also known as the J plug. for level 1 and level 2 charging. Tesla manufactures its own unique charging station using a proprietary Tesla connector, and the owners of EVs of other brands cannot charge from these stations without a Tesla connector. Although the EV charging connector types in Europe are similar to North America, a few notable differences require separate focus by charging infrastructure manufacturers. For example, since the standard household electricity is nearly twice the voltage used in North America for Europe, level 1 chargers are not used in Europe. Secondly, European manufacturers use the IEC 62196 type connector standard commonly known as the many keys instead of the J1772 connector used in North America. Therefore, the lack of international standardization of connectors is restricting the growth of EV charging infrastructure. Can we go on to the next slide? So this slide shows the total number of publicly available slow and fast chargers from the year 2015. In the year 2015, there were only 312 publicly available fast chargers across the globe. By the year 2020, it has reached to 385,678 units. So in the case with the publicly available slow charge, in 2015, there were only 3,682, which accounted for 922,216 in the year 2020. Also, as per IEA Sustainable Development Scenario, it is expected that by 2030, publicly available fast and slow chargers would account to 3.7 million for the fast chargers and 21 million for the slow chargers. Can we go to the next slide? To ponder upon the surge of the EV charging infrastructure, the power generation industry plays a vital role. Proper and stable electricity supply is expected to make the transition from ICE to EV happen at a much faster rate. For instance, the global EV fleet in 2020 consumed over 80 terawatt hour of electricity. This includes electric two and three wheelers, which are mainly used in China. Electricity demand from EVs account for only 1% of the current electricity of the total final consumption worldwide, and it is expected to account for only 2% by 2030 as per the IEA. Next slide. Yeah. So this slide shows some of the basic type of connectors used across different regions. As you can see, AC slow charging, the J1772 type of ports are mainly used in the North America for type 1, Japan for type 1 and Europe for type 2 charging. However, China uses GBT connector. For DC fast charging, North America and Europe uses the CCS type of charger, and Japan and China uses the CHAdeMO and GBT. Also, Tesla, as mentioned earlier, Tesla uses the proprietary ports and connectors across the globe. Thus, homologation of chargers and ports can really break the barrier of entry for some major global EV manufacturers in the upcoming market, as there are already existing infrastructure can easily support the charging requirements of newer vehicles. Next slide. Yeah. So this slide shows you some of the major niche and market disruptors for the EV charging infrastructure market. So some of the major players in the EV charging infrastructure are Tritium, Blink Charging, ChargePoint, BPPLC, EVBox, EVgo, Tesla, Webasto, RWE, and Delta Electronics. And we go to the next slide. So the onset of COVID-19 in 2020 led to a slowdown in the automotive and its infrastructure activities worldwide. All the regions reported in the analysis suffered a significant downturn in workloads during the first half of 2020. However, the pandemic accelerated the need for emission-free mobility, especially in developed regions such as Europe, the US, and China. According to the estimations by IEA, the global electric car sales rose to more than 3 million, reaching a market share of 4%. The rise in sales during 2020, peak of the pandemic, rising by 40% in global sales from 2.1 million electric car sales in 2019. Notably, the electric vehicle sales rose by a significant 160% in the first half of the 2021 compared to 2020, representing 26% of the total new sales in the global automotive market. As the sales of EV worldwide soar to exponential heights, major global EV charging infrastructure players have been implementing smart charging solutions in various countries to create a supporting ecosystem, complementing the development of future-ready, connected, hassle-free, and safer mobility. For instance, during the pandemic period of 2020 to 2021, EV charging infrastructure companies like EVBox, Tritium have entered into a large number of partnerships, acquired several significant players, and have strongly focused on the research and development of smart EV charging infrastructure. Can we go on to the next slide? So as you all can see, the electric vehicles have made a tremendous leap over the last decade, rising from just 7,876 battery electric vehicles in 2010 to almost 2.1 million registrations in 2020. It is anticipated that the market is expected to grow 2 to 3 folds in the next decade. Also, as per the IES Sustainable Development Scheme, it is projected that by 2030, battery electric vehicles are going to account for 28 million units across the world. Thus, the role of EV charging infrastructure is going to play a major role in aiding the growth of the EVs. Without proper infrastructure, EVs cannot penetrate the virgin market. Thus, governments and OEM must come up with major initiatives and strategies to expedite this process. So with this, we would conclude this webinar, and now I would like to hand it over to Slavin.
Thank you, Saikat. Thank you, everyone. So I think we're ready to go into our Q&A. I would like to remind everybody in the audience, please, if you have any questions, you can type them up in the box upper right-hand side of your screens. We have received a few, and we will also address the few which came in during the pre-registration. So to start with Gabi, to give Saikat a bit of a break. Gabi, I think you addressed that during part of your presentation, but how will the sanctions against Russia affect the global or the European automotive sector?
Yes. So far, the sanctions are mainly affecting the Russian market. Most of the foreign automotive producers there have, including Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Toyota, they have suspended operations until further notice. And although this will mean lost production for these companies, the exposure is not high, given that most of the production is intended for the Russian market. The EU and Japan have banned luxury cars exports to Russia. That is also having an effect on the Russian market. So far, we have seen the impact on the global sector via the increased prices of commodities, and also the EU has banned some sorts of imports of steel and iron from Russia. And also, as I mentioned, Russia is a key supplier of palladium. So if the sanctions, if there are new sanctions and these metals are added to the sanctions, this could really disrupt the automotive supply chain for automakers and pushing prices and costs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And another question for you. Do you expect the fast adoption of electric vehicles to drive major market disruption?
Yeah, definitely. We are already seeing such disruptions. There are new players entering the sector, given that the electric vehicles require smart manufacturing practices and components that are outside of the traditional automotive supply chain. We are seeing consumer technology giants such as Apple or Sony supplying electronics and software for the electric vehicles. We are seeing mining and commodities companies diversifying their production lines with investing in electric vehicles battery manufacturers. Also, we are seeing electric producers of batteries for the electric vehicles to invest in electric vehicle startups. So yeah, I think this is a trend that will gain traction over the next years, as the opportunities for growth in the segments are huge.
Indeed. And yes, you said that we need new materials, new structures. Naveen, how is the industry planning on having enough lithium or cadmium for batteries?
So yes, that's again an important point here. So I think currently the industry has been relying on China, which has been one of the major or the largest mines for automotive grade lithium ion. But however, if we are looking at a global pandemic or say any other economic crisis or political impacts, so again there are few new locations where there has been a lot of research development that have been seen, that is Serbia, Chile. They definitely would be some of the countries who would again fill in among the other countries who have been coming up with all the plans for lithium ion supply.
Okay. And I cut a couple of questions on the environmental impact. So what are the solutions for battery recycling? Would they have another use after being disposed of?
The secretary on mute.
Sorry. That's a good question, Slavina. So electric vehicle batteries, like the lithium-ion batteries, have a lifespan of around 10 to 15 years. So they are expected to be discarded when they reach at least an 85% or 80 to 85% of state of charge. So the common notion is to recycle old EV batteries for energy storage. Second life EV batteries have created a new pool in the energy storage system. So they are expected to work as an energy storage device for the solar and wind power renewable energy projects.
Okay, and another one along those lines. So do second-hand electric car, should we replace batteries instead of charging them by ourselves?
So replacing a battery for electric vehicle is not feasible. It is feasible for smaller vehicles like scooters and bikes, but for vehicles that have a minimum of around 50 kilowatt hour, 50 kilowatt hour package, it is quite heavy, and replacing them would be a stringent task. And also the batteries come in packs of cells, so that is the most significant and the most volatile structure of an electric vehicle. So during the process of changing or replacing, if any of the cells gets punctured, it could create a fire that is impossible to douse. So for smaller vehicles, it is possible, but for cars and commercial vehicle, it is not feasible right now.
Okay, and second-hand electric cars market. The question is on whether it needs to be subsidized.
Right now, at the current scenario, it doesn't make any sense to subsidize used EVs. Down the line in the future, government should also subsidize the purchase of used electric vehicles to help EVs maintain the resale value and promote the shift from EVs to the ICEs.
Okay. And Naveen, we have a question about the methodology of your insights. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that, or we can send the clients the details.
No. Yes, I would definitely want to take this up because when we started this particular EV charging infrastructure study, So usually we take into consideration various steps when it comes to understanding the market and then estimating the market size and forecasting. So we have done a three-step process here, wherein we have several other studies as well complementing to EV charging infrastructure. So initially we started with understanding what level of information that we have in-house in the repository in terms of maybe the EV sales or in terms of the companies, their activities, the revenues in the past couple of years, how it has been growing. So once we have all this information handy, and then we start the detailed secondary research that is very, very specific to the market. So again, here we tend to understand about 20 to 30 players who have been making a major impact on this particular market. They might be placed across different regions and countries. So firstly, we try to understand what kind of developments they have, whether it might be with respect to the new product launches, or it might be with the mergers and acquisitions, partnership, joint ventures. There have been a lot of these activities being seen when it comes to EV charging infrastructure. So we gather all this information and we tend to understand how these initiatives taken by the companies would impact the particular market in a short-term, mid-term, and a long-term way. So when we have all this information, we also tend to understand each and every company's revenue that we track for past 3 to 4 years. So how the companies have been cumulatively making an impact, what kind of year-on-year incremental growth that they have seen in their internal revenues, and how do they project their revenues in the coming year with basis the new initiatives that the companies have been taking. So once we have all this information through the secondary, so then we reach out to some of the industry experts, maybe across the value chain, maybe from the manufacturers, maybe from the end users, that is the EV OEMs itself. So try to understand how do they see growth in the EV charging infrastructure, and what kind of say activities that they've been looking forward to make this market successful. And during all these interactions, we have also understood, since we talk to various experts across different regions, we tend to understand how the governments in their regions and countries have been taking an effort to influence the usage of EVs, and what kind of support they are giving in terms of giving establishment for the EV charging infrastructure, and how they're say cooperating with the OEMs, what kind of partnership they have. So all these activities are being captured, which gave us an understanding about how the market has been shaped right now, and in next 2 years, 5 years, and down the line 10 years, how things might change with respect to the factors that we have evaluated. That is how we have come down to kind of estimations and forecasts. So since we have a statistical modeling tool in-house, so we feed all this information, make the qualitative, quantitative, and then giving all the weighted average for all these factors, we tend to come to an estimation in the forecasting model. So I think this is both a top-down and bottom-up approach that we use. So I guess this gives an understanding, a brief understanding about how we have done this research.
That's very impressive. Another bit of a technical question, Saikat, I think that would be for you. What forecasting algorithm was used for the electric vehicle sales forecasting?
So basically, we analyze all the economies, net zero policies and pledges. And we also analyze what were the pledges of the last 10 years and how much they have met. And as Naveen also mentioned, we also, whenever we go on a primary interview call with the key opinion leaders in the market, so we also try to understand what they look into the future, what are their expected sales, and we also try to gather, as we already mentioned, the major driving factors and the spending factor. So as already iterated by Naveen, we note down all those driving factors on those restraints, and we break down the market on the basis of short-term, mid-term, and long-term basis. So each of the drivers may have impact, different kind of impact on the short term, and it may have a different impact on the long-term basis. So on that basis, we weigh them, and on that basis, with our in-house statistical model, we come up with a sales focus. Also, we also along with that, we also follow the International Energy Association's Sustainable Development Model (SDS) model as a base of our forecasting structure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There's one question that I think I can answer as a move towards closing our session today. Where is the data available for analysis? As I mentioned at the start, we have a handout, so all the data that's in the presentation, all the participants can download as a handout from this event. And for any further information, as I mentioned, both ISI and the Insight partners, we have a wide range of broader as well as niche level reports on the automotive sector, which could, of course, could be accessed through our product. So I'll mention a bit for those of you in the audience who are not that familiar with our companies. The Insight partners, as I mentioned, offer a wide range of reports covering topics across 11 industry verticals that are covered by the teams, and one of them is automotive. The Insight partners, as we see, puts forth a keen eye to the detail for the crucial market trends, and they provide a one-stop solution to clients, helping them in daily news updates, analytical dashboards, real-time data feeds, among others. The key strengths of Insight partners are the analysis of niche markets and cutting-edge technologies, as well as there is a repository of historic and benchmarking data. So all this has helped the company to gain a reputation, as we see, across Fortune 500 companies. And the Insight partners are a long-standing partner of ours in their research, and their research is also available to all of our EMIS product clients. And a quick overview also and some numbers around EMIS. This is our proprietary database. It's a subscription product, a rich database of industry, company, and country content from reputable primary and secondary sources, such as the Insight partners. In addition to aggregating and delivering to clients such a massive one-stop solution to research needs, we also have a team of experts who turn it into actionable intelligence for decision-making. Finally, if you liked today's event, I would encourage you to visit our websites on EMIS and CIC, where you can find recordings of our previous events, and you can register for the upcoming ones. We have our macro team is holding another webinar next week on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Thank you for your attention. Stay tuned. And to those of you who are celebrating, happy holiday season. See you soon. Bye.